Cheers, everybody. We got Graham and Alex here.
Patty.
Smarty Pints coming at you. This time we're going to do a more in-depth video on forced carbonation and just carbonating in general when you want to put your stuff in kegs and you're tired of doing bottles.
Yep, and also when you're putting it in your kegerator, what PSI do you turn it up to, how long of a beverage line do you need, what ID do you need, etc., etc.
So behind us we've got a keezer that's been rigged up for a housing of different kegs with different beers. And we've got a variety on tap here. And in just a little bit here, Alex is going to go over how he has them kegged, the pressures, how you want to do the pressures, your beer lines. So here we go.
All right, cool. Well, I guess we should start with forced carbonating.
Forced carbonating!
Alrighty, so here we have a keg that's full of freshly kegged beer. Not really, it's empty, but just pretend. Suspend disbelief for this video. So let's say you just racked into this keg. You're really thirsty, so you want to drink it fast. What you do is you crank up the PSI on your regulator. Right here it's at 20, but depending on how high and how fast you want your beer done, you can crank that sucker even further if you want. So I would recommend anywhere upwards of 30 to 35 psi. And then you hook it up to your keg. So basically there's an in and an out. The gray is for the gas. Hook it up to the in and you can hear it accepting the CO2 as it's going in. If you shake the keg, what that does is it agitates a liquid so it will carbonate even faster. The temperature plays a role in it as well. The colder the beer is, the faster the CO2 is going to absorb. But another fun trick that I like to do when forced carbonating is switch your fittings. Put a liquid fitting on and then hook it up to the out. Make sure that your valves are open and the CO2 is on, or else you might get some beer backflowing through your CO2 lines. But hook it up through the out. And what that does is it forces the CO2 down through the dip tube to the bottom of the keg, and then it bubbles the CO2 up through the beer, which will let it carbonate faster as well. So basically, the higher the pressure, the colder the beer, the faster it's going to carbonate and the quicker you'll be drinking it. This gauge here shows how much CO2 is in your tank. So it's pretty common for it to be about 800 psi when it's brand new. And then this gauge here shows the psi being directed out into your keg. Alright, so we talked about if you want to get your beer carbonated and on tap quickly. But you know, if you're not in a hurry, what you can do is just hook it up to whatever your serving pressure is. Which that brings up another discussion. If you go online and you Google things about temperature versus CO2, you can find these charts, which Graham should pop up on the screen right now for you. And basically it shows at what PSI and what temperature how many volumes of CO2 are going to be in your beer. So for the sake of this video, let's say we have 14 PSI at 45 degrees. That is going to give you 2.42 volumes of CO2 in your beer, which is pretty much average for a standard ale or lager. So you can hook up the CO2 going to your keg of freshly kegged beer at 14 psi and then just wait for it to reach equilibrium. Gas is going to want to be in solution and at the same pressure as it is in the headspace of your keg. So after a while, which depends on the volume of beer in the keg and if it's been agitated at all, and how soon it's been cooled, how long it'll take to reach that equilibrium. But if you're not in a rush, I'd say it's going to take, on average, 3, 4, 5 days, something like that, to reach there. You can also speed along by doing what we illustrated before, by cranking the pressure up and shaking the heck out of that keg and forcing that carbonation into solution, and maybe do that the first day a few times at like a 35 psi, and then turning it down to your serving pressure. So let's say you just kegged your beer, And like we talked about, you cranked it up to like 35 psi and you shook it, and it's in the freezer, or not the freezer, it's in the fridge, and you're waiting for it to carbonate, but you get distracted and you do some other things, and then a day goes by, 2 days go by, 3 days, and it's still hooked up, and now you have over-carbonated beer on your hands. What do? Do you throw away the beer? No. All you have to do is bleed it. So you just release the pressure. And then what that does is it's going to bleed that CO2, it's going to reduce the PSI from the headspace, but you still have all of that CO2 in the beer itself, and that's going to degas, and it's going to start pressurizing the headspace in the keg until it reaches equilibrium. So once that happens, come back to the keg, bleed it again. Keep coming back and keep bleeding it until you get the CO2 down to the desired levels and you're adequately carbonated. All right, so let's say you have a pinlock style keg, not the ball lock. So you can't just pull the tab because there isn't one. So how do you depressurize this? With one of these handy dandy plastic depressurizers. So all you do is hook it up there and turn it, and it depressurizes. In a pinch, all you have to do really, if I can get this off of here, is depress the poppets. So any kind of object, a little screwdriver, a ballpoint pen, all you have to do is push that poppet in to relieve the pressure. And then once you're at your serving pressure, put it in your kegerator at temperature, and then you should be ready to go. But let's say you have it at a high serving pressure, like 14, 17, something like that, because you want it to be at that certain volumes of CO2 in your keg, but when you're serving it, the beer is flying out of the tap into your glass. What this means is that you need a longer serving line. So, Graham is going to pop up your hose length calculator on the screen for you right now. So you can just search this online as well, and you'll find many resources. And this, you can input the volumes, or the pressure, the PSI of CO2 going to your keg, and the inner diameter beer line that you're using. I would recommend 3/16 because it doesn't require as long of a hose. And then you can put in all these other variables. It says the hose diameter, the vertical distance between the keg and the tap, and the flow rate of how fast you want the beer coming out of the tap. And then it will tell you how many feet of hose you want. So at that 14 psi at 45 degrees for the 2.42 volumes of CO2, you need roughly 12 feet of hose. So if you follow me over here to the kegerator, you can see over here we have 14 psi leading into the keezer. And then if I open this puppy up, we have about 12 feet of hose, 3/16 ID on all these lines. So once the beer and the PSI in the keg have reached that same PSI and it's reached equilibrium, then I know that it's going to be coming out of the tap at a good flow rate. Let me grab a cup for you, and it should be nice and carbonated. So you can see that there's a good flow rate, nice amount of head on that beer, and it's good to be going right down the hatch. Cheers.